On to that important discussion now I've been talking about with the Minister of International Relations. President Ramaphosa has congratulated the United States President-elect Joe Biden on winning last week's election. Incumbent Republican President Donald Trump has shown no real interest in strengthening ties with the African countries. So how will Africa and specifically South Africa fare under the Biden administration? Let's discuss this now with International Relations and Cooperation Minister Naledi Pandor, who joins us all the way from Cape Town. Minister, a very good morning to you, and thank you so much for making time to speak to us. So I've already been talking about the President sending his congratulatory messages to President-elect Biden. Is there concern, though, Minister, from South Africa about President Trump's refusal to accept defeat, and what kind of message does that send to the world?
Good morning, Xoli, and morning to your viewers. Thank you for the opportunity. I think all of us are a bit aghast at the fact of the most well-established democracy being the one where the losing party is contesting what appears to be an extremely vigorous process to ensure free and fair outcomes. So we are hoping that the strong democracy of America will come to the fore and that we'll have a settlement that confirms that the winner that received the majority of the popular vote also received more than sufficient of the electoral college votes to be the president-elect, as President-elect Biden has been confirmed by virtue of all the news reports we've heard, the recounting that we've seen, and public statements by a range of important personalities. So we hope democracy will survive in America.
Minister, how would you describe South Africa's bilateral relations with Washington in the last 4 years?
I think the relations, certainly in sectoral terms, have gone on very well. And by sectoral, I mean the range of areas in which we have cooperative agreements and partnerships: trade, science and technology, health and innovation, agriculture, etc. So there's been a good progress in that area of policy and governance. At the government to government, it's been a positive but somewhat lukewarm, not as active and warm as we were used to relating with the Clinton administration or even President Obama's administration. So to some degree, we were able to continue with the strong bilateral programs, but I think at the political level, there wasn't as strong an affinity. President Ramaphosa did have direct contact with President Trump, particularly during this COVID era, where America very generously provided support to our country. But I believe that it is more in the area of sectors that we continue to have a very, very strong partnership.
Minister, it's interesting, an interesting use of adjectives there, lukewarm relations, and in particular you prefer to speak about the sectoral relationship, if we could call it that, that Washington has had with South Africa in the last 4 years. President Trump has had choice words for African countries, and perhaps if we zoom in on South Africa to be specific, he seemed to, or his administration seemed to embrace organizations like AfriForum, particularly on issues of farm murders. Was there any meaningful engagement, Minister, would you say, with the Trump administration, or was there no engagement at all?
Well, there was, because as I say, you cannot proceed with good trade relations without speaking to the Secretary of Trade. You would not be able to discuss the many programs that we have in the health sector if you're not engaged with the executive responsible for that area. But I do think that there was some rather unusual embrace of mistruths about South Africa that were often present in social media rather than being part of formal communication with the South African government. And that was most unfortunate. And you would recall that statements may have been made once, but they were not repeated because it was clear that they weren't based on facts and actually were misrepresenting the South African context as well as the policy intentions of government.
Minister,
I had better and much more, I think, useful interaction with members of Congress as well as Senate members who visited South Africa, members of the Foreign Policy Committee. So we were able to clarify a number of areas in which there had been misunderstanding.
Yeah.
And I got, quite positive feedback. And as time proceeded, in terms of the UN Security Council, where we began perhaps rather cool toward each other, I think over time, our ambassadors, our permanent representatives at the United Nations built a rapport which was sometimes and often, from time to time useful as we dealt with quite difficult resolutions. But there were times where there just wasn't agreement, there wasn't a shared perspective on several issues. But South Africa held her ground, which I think is very, very important.
I'm going to put you on the spot, Minister. From time to time, presidents will have discussions and they will call each other. Was there ever a time that President Ramaphosa picked up a phone or received a call from the man sitting in Washington, Donald Trump? Was there ever that one-on-one discussion?
Well, I can confirm yes, but President Ramaphosa will be the one who will tell you what they discussed, not me. But there have been several, yes, phone calls, including a very, I thought, important outreach by President Trump, primarily through Ambassador Marks, I must say, who's been a very active ambassador in South Africa. And that was to do with finding out what form of support South Africa might desire from the United States as we confronted COVID-19 and as the need for more and more PPE and masks and other equipment arose. President Ramaphosa was able to indicate where we had gaps, and we did receive support of health equipment as well as technical support of Americans working in the area of epidemiology. So, there have been phone calls, and these have led to productive outcomes.
Minister, the president-elect in the U.S., Joe Biden, some have suggested, and I would be among those who say he looks like a person and he's even sounded like a person based on the videos that we've seen and some of the literature that we've read. He has somewhat of a personal relationship with South Africa, standing firm in the 80s against the apartheid regime, and so the expectation would be South Africa is going to have much friendlier relations with Washington. But, Minister, I want to move this discussion to our next door neighbor. We're part of the SADC region. That country, Zimbabwe, is still under targeted sanctions from countries such as the US, for example. How would South Africa still stand firm that those sanctions be lifted? I'm going to start there, Minister.
Well, indeed, we do believe that the sanctions should be lifted. This is a position that we've embraced in SADC. It's a position we've agreed to within the African Union, both for Zimbabwe as well as Sudan, because we don't believe that the impact of the sanctions is helping to advance democracy, good governance, as well as growth. And that, in fact, for our neighbor in the region, the sanctions add to the lack of economic progress in Zimbabwe, and so add to the problems that confront South Africa of large numbers of migrants seeking economic opportunity in South Africa. So we want to see a prosperous, growing Zimbabwe so that it is able to absorb many more Zimbabweans in thriving industries. This is very, very important. So absolutely, we are convinced that the sanctions should be lifted, even though we often get the refrain that these are targeted sanctions, they're not aimed at industries, etc. But we do know that through the passage of various pieces of legislation and other regulatory mechanisms, there are inhibitions to trade that do impact on Zimbabwe as well as Sudan. And we would like to see those particular executive acts removed. But I always believe one should be careful about euphoria. I believe in realpolitik, and therefore I do want to see in concrete terms and hear what President-elect Biden's Africa strategy will be, as well as a strategy toward freedom of the people of Palestine, toward the people of Sahrawi. We want to see, is there going to be a progressive agenda?
Yeah.
Is there going to be a commitment to multilateralism? Will there be an embrace of the United Nations? Will there be a working with the World Health Organization as the premier global institution, advancing responses to COVID-19? So I will make a call and judgment on the basis of concretely what I see and hear.
Minister, final question to you, and very briefly, if you can. I'm going to argue, Minister, that, as you've correctly put it, these are smart sanctions targeted at individuals. Why in the world would South Africa want to advocate for the lifting of sanctions against a person like Emmerson Mnangagwa, the head of state in Zimbabwe, when human rights abuses that have even been acknowledged by your very department, Minister, continue in Zimbabwe? Hopewell Chinono is back behind bars as I speak to you right now.
Well, I certainly believe that one needs to study this issue much more than many of us do. There are particular executive acts, orders that have been put in place. There are pieces of obscure legislation that prevent certain trade activities. So while I acknowledge there are individual sanctions directed toward particular leaders, there are also, in addition, other sanctions that impact on the economy of Zimbabwe. And so I do believe that the sanctions that have been put in place have not achieved the objective, which is to change the situation. And when you have a strategy that doesn't appear to give the desired outcome, you need to look at whether you should alter those strategies. So I'm not arguing for carte blanche in terms of human rights being abused. Of course, that is absolutely not something we would support. But what we believe is, let us change the condition so that the Zimbabwean people can take the necessary steps to move to actions that we would very, very vocally support. And we believe sanctions are an inhibitor toward making positive advances.
Dr. Naledi Pandor, thank you very much for your time. Minister of International Relations and Cooperation.